I'm Dan Condi. I'm an analyst at the industry analyst firm, ESG. And I'm joined by these luminaries from a variety of companies, as you could see in a slide there. So this is our Carlos Matos of Bank of America. And then we have Nivesh Guptati from Gap. We have Shafiq Sheikh from GE Digital, which I remember is different than GE Analog, if you can. And then we have Bruce Pinsky from Intuit and Harman van der Linde from Citibank. So I'm going to basically stay out of the way and let our panelists focus on what they've done so far. And the way I'm going to do it is to have Carlos describe how the working group came about, the list of issues or barriers to adoption of hybrid cloud environments. And then I'm going to ask questions about some specific areas of interest, like applications, networking, organizations, and such. So I'm going to hand it off to Carlos.
Thank you so much, Dan. Well, we have been really busy this last few months, actually, as part of a hybrid cloud. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the work that Bob Wozicki from GE actually had been making. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it to ONUG this time. He got sick, so we hope that he gets well soon. But we recognize all the work that he has been putting as a co-chair of this group. So as I said, basically, we have been really busy in the working group. Couple things so that give you a little bit of background. Back in January or December timeframe, we started looking at what would be the best use of our time. So as part of a working group, and we determined that we wanted to actually connect with the cloud service providers to make this, an interactive exercise, really from the users group to actually get and get feedback and tell them what our problems or challenges were. So that was a kind of the whole idea initially, that each of the different components, or basically the members of a working group, could express 5 challenges that they see right now in adopting the cloud, or basically any type of challenges they were experiencing with cloud service providers. So what we did is members from the group from Pfizer, Fidelity, Gap, FedEx, GE, First Data, and a number of other groups. I don't want to miss anybody, but all of us actually put out the specific top 5 challenges that we saw in there. So right now, what you're going to be seeing really in the slide, it's really those top challenges that we as a group basically identified. In the first top part of the slide, actually we see for basically the first-time adopters or companies or enterprises that are fairly new into the process and trying to onboard cloud services or cloud services. And the other side, the bottom side of that slide, is items that we identify also for enterprise that are mature or that they have already been doing cloud for a while. So that we're going to be talking today. Also, just so you let you know, as part of a background, is that during today you're gonna see some sessions in there for specific cloud service providers that very gratefully and kind have been collaborating with us. As I said, part of what the ONUG did was actually reach to a number of service providers and actually create that link between us and them, which I think it was really important for this, the preparation on this. So all these items that we consider challenges and were expressed by all the members from ONUG were actually given to these cloud service providers in order for them to actually address them and see how we can improve or find ways so that we can actually work together with those challenges. So with that, today you're going to be seeing those presentations from the cloud service providers that are present here, and they're going to be basically, they have been given this information so that they can actually comment on how we could actually get into more of an open and, and continuous way to actually improve our relation with the service providers.
Okay, great, Carlos. So we don't have the time to go through each and every one of these, but as Carlos mentioned, the first-time adopters are people who are just tipping their toes in the water on using cloud, and then the mature enterprises have been at it a long time. So I'm going to focus on a few areas that I think will be interesting. Some issues are probably generic, so we won't go through them. So I'm going to start with Nivesh to address some of the issues related to applications, whether it's application architecture or application porting. If you could address some of those issues, that would be good.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're wired up to the cloud, right? And you start thinking of the cloud as an IT optimization. And then you realize that it's really, you're missing something here. There is an aspect of business innovation that's associated with the cloud that's suddenly enabled across your business domains. So what does that do to you, though? So that means now all of a sudden there are multiple cloud providers that may make more sense to the business to connect to. So what happens from a connectivity model across all these different cloud providers, both private, public, and multiple public cloud providers? That's been a challenge that's been expressed across many forums. There's also a challenge of application abstraction versus portability, right? So the higher the level of abstraction you're working at, the less portable you become because everyone has their own secret sauce implementation. So what does that do to your application portability paradigms? If you're writing an application, are you bound to a particular provider, or can you actually move it around? The same thing applies to data portability as well. So you've got your data in your private cloud. You want to move it over to a public cloud provider. Now, how do you map it across multiple regions and across multiple vendors and across different degrees of latency and across different degrees of reliability, high availability, to be honest, as well? So these are key challenges in the portability of both data gravity, application. And to be honest with you, there is an architectural impact for this as well.
Right.
Like you can no longer just lift and shift your monolith and expect that to scale, expect that to cloud scale, really. So how do your architecture patterns change to actually support business needs in a growing global economy across multiple cloud providers? And how does your backbone, your network backbone, which is probably of more interest to you guys, accommodate something like this in an efficient and consistent manner?
I see. So as we could see, portability is an issue that comes up for mature ones who've been at it. When you're just doing it for the first time, it may not be an issue because you're just getting it up and running. Okay.
Yep.
All right. So the next question is for Shafiq regarding more the connectivity side. I don't want to call it networking per se. Obviously, it's related. But what are some of the connectivity issues that you think are barriers for adoption? In other words, what could go wrong?
Yeah, I think for the early adopters, the biggest thing that comes into the mix when you are planning to move to the cloud is how you're going to connect, right? Is it going to be the VPN thing, the very pretty standard, or is going to be a direct connect? Or you want to move your edge, right, towards close to the AWS, right? Some businesses have done that where they have moved their edge from the network perspective close to the AWS or close to the other cloud providers. But it's not feasible for everyone, right. And I think that's the key challenge that you will see in the beginning. So maybe some businesses may start with very basic VPN connectivity and then learn through the way and then determine whether their approach is to more go beyond that, or that's the right approach for them, maybe. So that's, and then the other things that come into the mix is the redundancy type, right? From the ISP or MPLS service provider perspective, where are you going to connect? How your regional data centers lay out? How you want to? What would be the way that you will provide that regional failover capability that Vish just alluded to from the latency perspective? So those type of things will come into the mix. And then as you move into the more maturity model, the challenges that you will face is depending upon your business requirements around the segmentation, right? And the visibility from the security perspective. Do you want to do the segmentation? Is there a requirement that you want to have certain traffic, certain VPCs to be created separately out, and then is there a requirement to kind of monitor the traffic between the VPCs, right? Those type of challenges will come as you evolve into that more maturity model, and then how you enable, and then at the end of the day, how you automate all that stuff. Because if you have a cloud piece that is automated and you have a network connectivity piece which is still requires 30 days to get done, that doesn't fly, right? My server can be up in 2 minutes, but if the connectivity from the network perspective is not there, it doesn't serve any purpose. So that's something that you have to determine right up front is when you move to that maturity model, how you're going to automate and how you're going to do the cloudiness, right? That's how I call it, like the cloudiness, bring cloudiness into the network environment, and that would basically bring the services within 2 minutes, whether it's the compute side or whether it's the network side.
I see. So as usual, security is always top of mind, so it's never underrated. It's
Yes,
you
absolutely.
can't ignore it in the beginning nor at the end, right?
Right. And that defines some of your architectural decisions.
Right.
Of that security and IT risk type requirements, depending upon whether you have a critical business information or crown jewels, you don't want to move to the cloud. And what are the other low risk and high risk, medium risk requirements are from the workload perspective, and how you define that architecture impacts security perspective as well as from network, and then the eventual the workload itself.
Right, and as you said, when you have a hybrid cloud, it could be on-prem, off-prem, multiple providers. So there are all these permutations that you have to deal about. Okay, so we're going to move on to a question to Bruce Pinsky about issues related to the logical versus kind of physical architectures, and I was wondering if you could address that. It's sometimes counterintuitive or obvious, depending on where you come from.
Well, there's a sticker on my coworker's computer. His laptop says, "The cloud is just someone else's computer." And really what we've found is that if you take developers and app ops teams and just drop them into the cloud, they really don't understand all of the logical infrastructure constructs that need to be there in order to implement security and compliance and data protection, right? They've been handheld for so many years. They don't really know what does an HADR strategy look like? What is a backup strategy? How do you effectively manage IAM? All of these issues. And so when we first started on this journey, we let them go on their own. They're going to be doing DevOps and rolling their own pipelines and all of this. But at the end of the day, what we've really been finding is they don't address the kinds of security concerns, particularly that we in the product infrastructure team typically look after for them. So you find all of a sudden, oh look, there's a Jenkins console wide open on the internet. Why? Well, because it's more convenient than VPNing into the VPC or going through a Bastion host, right? I can get to it from my house more easily.
Right.
So we have taken a step back and said, well, we, the product infrastructure team, need to take a more active role in being the stewards of architecture, of security posture, of all of the things that the developers thought they wanted to be involved in. And when they start looking at it and you start bringing these issues to them, they say, yeah, we're not so interested in that. We're interested in writing code and getting it out the door, right? And so that's where we're at now is just recently, as a matter of fact, we've rolled out a new identity management system that integrates with our enterprise identity management. So no longer do you directly access your AWS account. You do it through credentials that we internally manage through multi-factor authentication, for example, which is a big change from how it was being done for the last 2 to 3 years of letting the developers kind of run crazy on their own.
So it seems like what you create centrally is kind of the guardrails or the framework, and then the people who want to move fast, agile or whatever you want to call it, could, as long as they meet the guardrails, they could do the right thing.
Well, exactly. What they really want is they want to know that they're deploying in a secure, safe, reliable manner, but they just don't want to pay attention to it, much like they want to do in the data center, right? That's been their goal. We just want to roll our code, don't get in our way, but make sure we're doing things smart and safely, right?
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so finally, we're going to move to the people side. So this will be Harman. So I want to get an idea about the organizational implications of moving to a hybrid cloud environment? What does it mean? Do I need to train people? Do I need to reorg? What are some of the lessons that you've learned?
Well, a number of them. We're kind of going through the process right now in Citigroup in terms of exploring some external cloud deployments. But I think most of what was said so far, I think, touches on pretty much what I have to deal with as well. Obviously, security compliance first and foremost. But I think the interesting thing is that if you work with a public cloud provider, spinning up compute instances or storage instances, that's the easy part, right? But then the question is, okay, when you have an issue, what then, right? There's no number I can call. And typically the response is, right, here's the API. That itself is nothing wrong with it, but fundamentally, the first thing you need to solve is, okay, with an API, if that's kind of your operational kind of input, right, of kind of integration into a cloud infrastructure, how does that kind of match up with what I do today, right? And so there's a big tooling question there, right? And simple if things go down. And then secondly is, and that's really what you were asking, the organizational aspect. No matter how you look at it, I think a public cloud, right, the strength is also basically its weakness in a sense. It gives you a very efficient way to spin up IT infrastructure sources. But it is implied that the end user is much more involved in terms of actually driving that particular, the configuration, security controls, and what have you, of that particular IT infrastructure, using the automation that's provided to the end users. I think a typical application developer, certainly I think in big companies, they're not used to it. I don't think they kind of expect it. They're more in this model. There is a white glove operations, basically, support team. There is a ticketing system, right? And you have a pretty reliable infrastructure that has all the resiliency, all the security capabilities in place. And the only thing they have to basically focus on is basically deploy code in specific compute instances. And obviously, always the complaint there is that, hey, getting new capacity always takes far too long, right? And making any changes in the infrastructure always takes far too long. And clearly, it's very, I think at first hand, it's very enticing. Say, okay, let's just go to public cloud. I can do it all. I can do this very quickly. But then the issue is there is no support structure around it anymore. And basically now, and I think I heard it here as well, there's kind of a gap, right, between. No pun intended here. There is a gap between, okay, the existing kind of white glove operations model and kind of public cloud where it's really literally self-serve. And there's a lot of these responsibilities, I think, come back to the application teams. And I'll get back to your question, number one. I think operationally, there needs to be some sort of middle layer. That's what we do as well. I think there's some sort of a front end for a typical company that needs to kind of at least manage and also monitor, right, the overall, I think, the public cloud deployment. But also secondly, I think, and that's really what I'm involved in, there's a lot of education that's needed for application teams to understand that through a cloud, clearly there's benefits, meaning you get your infrastructure much quicker, which is a good thing from an agility perspective. But there's an implied responsibility also, is that since it's much quicker, it's much cheaper, right? But on the flip side is there's much more implied responsibilities that you actually now are, to some extent, also responsible, right, for the overall application infrastructure deployment if something goes wrong. So there's clearly, I think, setting the right expectation is number one. Two, I think operations, there is some sort of a thin layer, additional operations layer that you need to create to at least kind of to front end some of at least the key deployment activities in a public cloud infrastructure. At least that's the way we do it.
Were people able to either self-organize or learn on their own, or did you have to have the organization give them prescriptive guidance on how to train themselves?
It's a little bit of both. My experience is in the application world, typically people don't like change. And specifically when you have more mission critical applications, people are fairly reluctant to make any changes. And then you have typically a core group of more, forward-looking, more tech, I think more risk-taking type of engineers that are clearly gung-ho. They've been doing the AWS, hobby projects and everything else, and they really want to go full force. I think it's somewhere in the middle. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. So a question back to Carlos, which is in the working group, I'm sure that there was a laundry list of many, many things that you were examining. And do you think that people sort of focused on these issues naturally, or was there a lot of contention? Because there may be people who, obviously we have a wide variety of companies here, good representation from financial institutions, but as well as retailers and such. So everybody has a different set of requirements. But do you see a lot of commonalities that said, you know, it's interesting, barriers to cloud adoption is the same no matter who you are? Or is it like, hey, you know, us in finance is this way and people in retail have a different view? How did you find that?
That's a great question. And actually, everybody has their own view, right? One thing in terms of commonalities and things that we have been discussing is really, and we want as ONUG, we want to actually help on that side of things in terms of, and as part of our next steps, if you will, is going to be like creating or showing some of the guidelines that we have all followed, right? We have been talking about the commonalities. Everybody in his own way, they have addressed the cloud as a complete, it's not only as a project, it's macro. I mean, it's really big, it's affecting every single enterprise, industry, or will affect in the future. So a lot of us have been taking this as a holistic view of a program, if you will. So there are elements in there that we all have been working on in terms of governance, in terms of compliance, in terms of security, education. So those are the type of things in terms of the guidelines. Of course, there's a technology around this and the complete framework that we're going to use for the cloud or multi-cloud availability models, all that. So we're going to work actually with the community also to bring up guidelines, if you will, in terms of what that program entitles for all of us. Because that has been the biggest commonality. Everybody in their own way have implemented elements of that program in there. And when you implement it that way, you can be successful. You have to organize yourself. I mean, this is a big challenge. It involves people, processes, and a number of many things. So it is good to actually address this as a program, a holistic view of an umbrella of things that you need to actually move into a cloud.
Right, yeah. And obviously that's the reason why we have the sessions that follow where companies ranging from Amazon or Microsoft or Equinix being more of a hoster, but still a cloud company nevertheless, and IBM, and to see how they interact and engage you to incorporate those requirements for their roadmap. And some of them are moving very fast. They don't do a traditional 2-year or 18-month roadmap, but still input is completely necessary as well. So this is a relatively short session. It's about 20 minutes or so. We have the following presentations from the cloud service providers, and then a wrap-up session that follows after lunch as well. But we do have some time for a few questions. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and maybe we could address this before we adjourn. So please raise your hands if you have any questions. Yes, back there, please.
What kind of analysis have you done around the cost comparisons between a public cloud infrastructure versus O&O versus co-located hardware? What did you find? And just curious, what methodologies did you use?
Let me make a comment because that's part of one thing that ONUG is working on as well. We have been working out with 451 Research that is going to be conducting a TCO analysis so that all of us have been always interested. Each of us have made their own TCO or total cost of ownership type of analysis in our own way. But we're going to try to address this from the, as I said, kind of a guidelines or showing people how the TCO is determined, if you will, for cloud. So one of the things that we have done in the working group, and anybody within, as a community ONUG can participate, we have been clearing up the way so that we can, each of us participate in that TCO analysis with 451 Research. So I'll just open it up and let the others kind of comment on that as well.
And we are running a bit short of time, so if you have a very quick one.
Yeah, for us, we're not considering cost, oddly enough. For us, it's about developer agility and speed of deployment. I can tell you with a general brush stroke, it's costing more money, typically because our app ops teams and the development community oversize the amount of resources and the size of the resources they need in order to run their applications in the cloud environment. So at first stroke, it's looking like it's going to cost us more money than doing it ourselves. and I think that will change as people start seeing the bills.
So lucky not to be concerned about money.
Yeah.
Yes.
Short answer is we've done actually quite a lot of analysis. I can take that offline with you. But just to kind of follow up what you're saying, I think it came up in the analyst panel discussion yesterday. There's a bit of this what they call deflationary kind of effect, meaning that it becomes so easy to spin up infrastructure, yet it's a lower cost, but you're going to deploy more and more of it. So net, it's actually either, it's not going to be that much cheaper. But the only thing what I will say to you is as a final note in this particular case, the infrastructure piece, I think, is only a fairly small part of the total cost that you need to look at. If you look at, certainly the application side, the processes, human labor, tooling, code development, I think that's really why you need to focus on if you really want to drive efficiencies in the business.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think we have
Polling.
just about, oh, you do have one question? Or?
No, it's a polling.
Oh, the polling, yes. There is a poll up on the screen, so if you have some time to just get in the swing of things, please do that. And we may have a couple more polls coming up, but we're wrapping up here.
I think we have a question
There's
on
a question there.
over there.
We have a couple minutes.
I think in the interest of time, could we take it offline? Is that all right?
No, we actually are good on
Such a
time,
good
Dan.
question.
You're good on
we can go
time?
ahead and
Okay,
take the
please
question.
go ahead. Yeah, okay.
So you had there a list of barriers, visibility. So what do you mean about, from your perspective, what is visibility? Does it apply to service performance? Does it apply to cybersecurity? And how do you gain visibility? Is it through instrumentation, especially in a hybrid cloud environment where you have private and public? How do you gain visibility in terms of service, and how do you gain service assurance in such a complex environment?
Yeah, from the perspective of what that meant for some of the suggestions on some of the companies, visibility had anything to do with basically monitoring, troubleshooting, logging, especially in the case that you go to every single service provider and you assume that the principle is that you will use their specific monitoring and logging capability, if you will, and service visibility and service management, if you will. So it's always difficult that that you have to go to one service provider, learn all the different event management and CM, if you will, that they have. Then you go to the next one; it's completely different. So you have to bring up all their any type of tools or mechanisms to actually collect data and stuff like that. So from each service provider is different. So part of the visibility challenge is really that you have to adapt and learn and get to know every single one of the service providers, how they do things. Then that's a challenge.
And to quickly add on to that, so when you're talking about multi-cloud or even hybrid cloud, right? So you've got all these disparate tooling systems in each of these cloud providers. How do you get an aggregated view, right? So, and that's not something you can expect straight out of a CSP, but there's a bunch of innovation, thankfully, that's happening in that space to get us essentially an aggregated view of our entire cloud landscape or our application stack that spans multi-cloud landscape as well.
Great.
But that's something that needs to get addressed.
And just to add to that, to your question is that the visibility also includes the analytics piece, right? That you may want some visibility to the traffic to make some decisions, right? So that's another level of visibility. And then the third level is more like that you pointed out, and I mentioned it in my piece, is the cybersecurity piece. Do you need visibility to what level of visibility? Because too much visibility, too much inspection may cause complexities. So you have to make a right choice, determine the right thing that you have to do in terms of getting visibility to those workloads and that traffic.
Okay, great. So we'll be reconvening after lunch, and that'll be a good time to ask more questions and wrap it up. So thank you very much to the panelists, Bruce, Steve,
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Herman, thank you very much.